Welcome back to Outrage Science Bites. I'm David Beckmeyer, and this is day 26 of our 30-day challenge, continuing our deep dive into bridging our divides. For the last few weeks, we've been hearing in-depth answers to your biggest questions. Today, we're mixing up the format with rapid-fire insights from Lisa Swallow, co-founder of Crossing Party Lines and author of Yes You Can Talk Politics, a workbook for talking across party lines. Lisa is going to run the rapid fire round herself, asking and answering the questions that came up at the recent Bridging Movement Summit. Listen for this sound between questions. Here's Lisa.
Question. What systems are primarily causing division, and what can realistically be done to change those systems in the next few years? What's priority 1 or 2 for you? Well, I think we need to stop looking for solutions to division outside of ourselves. Division is caused by our limbic systems, the part of our brain that keeps us safe. People who learn to work with their limbic systems, like firefighters or the military, they learn to manage their reactivity, and they are much less likely to fall into the trap of vilifying the other. So let's figure out ways to get more and more people managing their own limbic systems. And I would say one of the easiest ways is to be curious. You cannot be curious and angry and defensive at the same time. Being curious activates a whole different part of the brain, which is the rational neocortex. What should be the limit of civic goodwill, and who gets to decide that? Oh my goodness. First thing I want to ask is, what is civic goodwill, and how is that any different from other kinds of goodwill? I think we are really doing our best to complicate every issue we encounter with separating out regular goodwill from civic goodwill. Honestly, I think the limit to any kind of goodwill toward others ought to be measured in terms of harm and danger. I like to assume that we will have goodwill towards everyone unless we see them doing harm to ourselves, harm to others. The challenge here is that we don't all define harm or danger or even violence in the same way. So there are some people who say, well, your words are hurting me. Well, your beliefs are hurting me. We don't want to tell people they shouldn't feel hurt. At the same time, we do have limits to what we hold people accountable for. That's why we've gotten into things about microaggression or labels or hate speech, things that people didn't realize could be hurting other people seem to be hurting others. So I guess the next thing we want to consider is intention. Was the intention to harm or not? And if the intention is not to harm and yet it is harmful, I think our goodwill comes into play by us stepping in and helping people recognize the effects of their words or behaviors and helping them do things differently. And you can't do that without some goodwill. I think it's a silly question. I think we all need to answer that. And I think it is also a very difficult question because we want to have goodwill towards all, but we see people that maybe we don't feel like we should. And I think that means we have to think. We have to really look inwards, understand what's driving us before we can know the best route forward. The panel seems to ask for non-zero-sum engagement, but how can that work with people who only want zero-sum outcomes? Whoa. Question for you is, what people really only want zero-sum outcomes? I'm curious about that. I can see that it might seem like there are people out there, and I imagine there are people who can't imagine anything besides zero-sum outcomes, but that doesn't mean that's what they want. I think we need to help people recognize that there are alternatives to a zero-sum game, that there are alternatives to black and white thinking. Let's help them recognize that. And step 1, present them with some opportunities, some options, help them understand what a non-zero-sum engagement or outcome might look like. I do want to acknowledge, though, that for many people, zero sum is much more comfortable. I mean, if it's only A or B, we don't have to think so hard. So let's make it easy for those folks. Let's just shove it in their face. Here are lots and lots of non-zero sum outcomes. Maybe we can help wake them up, help them recognize there are alternatives to that. Let's become the Baskin and Robbins of civic engagement, where there are lots of choices. People tend to bond over shared dislike or hatred. How can we harness this bonding energy without it becoming destructive? Well, first, let's acknowledge that we also bond over shared likes and shared loves. I mean, look at the bleachers at a baseball game. Love of game overcomes fear of the other, and you'll see people from all walks of life, all political views sitting side by side. So if we recognize we also bond over likes and loves and curiosity, I think we can start creating more opportunities for this positive kind of bonding and celebrate positive bonds. Let's also recognize that the flip side of every dislike or hatred is like and love. And let's try to find ways to turn all of these things that are dividing us around and flip them out on their heads so we find out what we love, what we like, what we share. And that's what bridging is all about, getting to know one another well enough to recognize that.
That's all for today's episode of Outrage Science Bites. Stay curious, and until next time, I'm David Beckmeyer. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy these Science Bites episodes, you may enjoy the long-form Outrage Overload podcast at outrageoverload.net.